Howdy there neighbors, Ian with eTrailer here. Today we're going to be installing and taking a look at the Red Arc Liberty and the ETBC7 kit from eTrailer. This ETBC7 here is going to be a great way to go from a 4-pole to a 7-way. It's going to allow you to hook up to those 7-way connectors, so that way you've got a good connection for your braking systems on your trailer. And the Liberty here is going to be a great option up to 2 axles. Of course, you could always have that single if need be, if that's what you got. For the features of this, it does have the manual override where you can press that and it will apply the trailer brakes. And then our gain here is all the way up to the 10th setting on this particular one. It does indicate with a red light when you're at the higher settings, so that way you kind of have a visual indication while you're driving of what specific gain setting you're in. And our Liberty here is going to be a proportional brake system, so the more that is applied to the brake, the harder the trailer brakes are going to apply, unless of course we're just using the manual override, in which case it's just going to put the trailer brakes on. So say if you're on a hill or going down inclines and you don't want to burn up the brakes on your vehicle and would prefer to have most of your braking power go to the trailer, you can use just the manual override by itself, or that proportionality can just be what you use if you don't feel like the manual is going to be necessary. I think this is really one of the best options, if not the best option, for our Hyundai Palisade here. If we were towing something with 3 axles or doing something with an off-road capability, that's where I would lean more towards the Tow Pro Elite opposed to the Liberty. But I think in this case and the applications we're using, this is going to be fine for this vehicle. And as far as this install, I wouldn't think it's all that difficult. We were able to accomplish it in a reasonable amount of time. There are going to be some other components that you may need to install at the same time, so that's a good thing to factor in as far as the wiring and getting that all ran. But we'll hop into that install and I'll walk you through the whole process. One thing before we get going on this install, you want to make sure that negative battery terminal is completely disconnected. You'll just take off the cover. You can even flip that to the side if you didn't want to remove it completely, but very easy to remove. And then there's a 10mm bolt on the top of that that'll allow you to completely disconnect our negative side. That way we don't end up with any surprise shorts in the system causing issues before we even get going. And then you'll want to tuck that out of the way, and then I like to just put the cover back on, so that way I know there's no possibility of that ground accidentally coming back to life while we're working on the rest of the vehicle. So getting started, we want to mount the bracket that the plug is going to live in. What I did is I picked this center part here. It's a removable piece from the factory of this part of the bumper, so I figured if they ever choose to remove the plug, they've got the option at that point to just replace this, opposed to having holes in a full part of the bumper or having any holes drilled into our hitch that we just put on. So I've just got that mounted there with some hardware that I came across, just because the only thing the kit comes with is some self-tappers as far as getting that all mounted up top to the bracket on the bumper here. And then I've got the plug already through, and then you can just slide this onto there, so that way as far as the plug being mounted to the bumper, that part is taken care of. And this is just going to be our 4-way. We've already got a wiring adapter for our 4-ways hooked up to this vehicle. But it is something you may want to factor in when you're selecting all that. So just make sure you've got at least this as well. It's going to split between the two, so that way you've still got all your lights and everything there. But if you have a trailer with 4-way and then another one with the 7-pole here, you've got the options for both. But there's no real change on that, because it does have the harness that's going to plug directly into the Curt connector that's already on this vehicle. So it's same 4-pole there, but we're just hooking directly to that. and then we'll want to take some electrical tape, get that tape together just so it stays nice and secure, because all this is going to live up behind the bumper. So that'll take care of our four-way, and with that all taped up, we've got these two wires here and then our ground wire. The blue wire is going to be connecting to the white wire in the large section of harness that we've got going up front, and then the black wire, of course, to that black wire as well. But before we hook that up, we've got to run this line, so I wanted to talk about where my routing came for that. I've just ran along with the power wire for our four-way connectors there. I ran that with our harness that we're using for the 7-pole, and we came up over the subframe, just attaching to that brake bracket, and over that frame down to where these brake lines are coming, and then I followed those all the way up. You will have to take this panel loose if you're going to follow that same routing. We just want to avoid any hot or moving objects, so since we were able to stay away from the exhaust, I picked coming over to this side with it. Plus everything we've got in the back is all hooked up that way too. But to take this off, there are just some push pin connectors and then 10 millimeters, little 10 millimeter bolts that are going to be holding all that together. And you can just drop that out of the way, follow the brake lines up ahead of the brake system here, and continuing back up to the front. And then what I did to be able to run that line up, I dropped a fish line down through the most convenient part up top, just to be able to connect to the wire and yank that back up to the top. And we'll talk about kind of those connections and how that's ran up there here momentarily. Making sure that we had enough up front to be able to hook up to the circuit breakers that are going to go up there, and then I've got plenty back here as well. So I'm just going to try to figure out where the best pathing for this up here will be. So it's going to live again back behind the bumper, and we do have a ground line that we'll have to pay attention to that's going to need to live up there as well. So I'll push this into place, find about where we're going to connect, give it just a little bit extra so I got plenty to work with. And then once we've got that figured out, we're going to go ahead and just give that a full snip all the way across. And once we've got that cut, we're just going to very gently and lightly make a small sliver so we can access both the black and the white wire. You do want to make sure you're not puncturing those at all. So razor blade works. Sometimes you can just cut right at the end with a pair of snips and then get those to pull apart. And kind of work that back and forth, again cutting if we need to a little more. And then we're going to strip the ends of those back so that way we can get the butt connectors attached. Now that we've got those stripped back, we're going to come to our blue and black wire on the 7-pole harness here, and we will hook our white wire to the blue wire and black to the black. The kit does not come with heat shrink butt connectors. We do offer them on the website, and since this is going to be living at the back of the vehicle, we don't want any road grime or corrosion to get into that connection and cause issues down the road. So we're going to get these crimped in there and then go ahead and heat shrink that up, and I'll show you how to do so. Now we're going to come through, since this is all heat shrink, we're just going to get that nice and warm and wait for that shrink down enough to seal those ends, keeping all that debris out of there. So now we need to use the white wire with the attached ring terminal to get to a chassis ground. There's a few options as far as trying to get a good chassis ground. You can either come over here, but what I think I'm going to do is come up over the back of the hitch and try to get up in this area. So I did kind of have to reroute as far as that ground. I ended up going above the hitch here and onto where this bracket for the rear bumper is going to mount. Part of that is because how short the harness coming out of your 7-pole connector here for the ground is going to be. It is going to make it a little difficult, so you may have to extend it, which is completely okay. Again, just making sure to use those heat shrink butt connectors so that way everything stays corrosion free and functions as intended. Now we're going to take either an extra section of wire, or we do sell by the foot wire as well, so that way we can run from our circuit breakers that are going to be up here in the engine bay back to the brake controller in the vehicle. So we need to go through the firewall. I found a grommet that's got a nice big harness coming through it. I've just gone right below the harness, pushed a long screwdriver through so that way I can see it here up in the engine bay. I'm going to tape that to the end of my wire here and then get that pulled through so that way we can make sure we've got our power that needs to go to the brake controller once we've got it in there. So next we're going to strip back the wires that are ran into the vehicle through the firewall there. We're going to take one of our smaller terminal ring connectors here, and we can put one on each side because they are going to be going to the circuit breakers we're going to install. And with those wires ran through the firewall, now we can hook up our circuit breakers here. The kit's going to come with 3 different options, a 20, a 30, and a 40. What we're hooking up, since we've got the Red Arc Liberty that's going to be going in, for the brake controller is going to be the 30 amp circuit breaker, and the black wire that's ran through the firewall is going to go to the auxiliary silver post. And then we did make a jumper with, again, ring terminals that are going to be going to our positive connector. And then our 40 amp down here below is going to, again, have our jumper that we've created to our power post, that copper plated terminal there. And then on our silver terminal here, that is going to go to the main harness that we ran the 2 wires back. The intent of that one is going to be our 12 volt power to the 7-pole connector. And then we've got our 30 amp connector here that is ran for that same ETBC7 system, going back to feed the power to our brake controller in the vehicle. We've got our ETBC7 ran through the firewall already, and that's sealed back up so we don't have any debris or corrosion or anything that's going to attempt to come into the vehicle, moisture, things like that. We're going to take these wires, just set them off to the side now so that way we can get this dash panel off. And to access that, we're just going to pull on this fuse panel from the bottom. It'll fall off. And then we're going to need to get this side panel off here. So what I've done is just applied a little pressure to the side. You can see a gap start, and then you can either start at the bottom or the top and kind of work your way down. But we're just going to get those clips to unhook, and then once we've got that whole panel off, you may just have to kind of keep angling a little further and further out and make sure that weather strip gets out of the way there. We're trying to access these 2 Phillips heads that we'll need to get loose, and then there is another Phillips head here towards the bottom. There's a flip down panel that you want to find the edge of. And then to open this tiny access panel, you can either use a small flathead or just something that can be wedged in the top. Apply slight pressure down, and then that will pop open, allowing us to get to this Phillips head here. And we'll want to remove that, and then the other 2 that I showed you, and then I'll show you how to take the panel out. And so now we'll need to remove this handle for the hood release. Inside there's a tiny mushroom-shaped plastic retainer. What I found to work is just using a 7mm that will sit over it and applying a good amount of pressure so that it pushes the tabs down, and then you should be able to just slowly work that off all the way around until that handle removes. As we're pulling this away, we want to try to get this corner away from the top here. So it's got a little push tab that's just going to snap into it, and once you've got that loose, we should be able to come up and out. And then it is all just pull tabs the whole way around. If you start at the bottom and get all of the couple ones at the bottom loose, and then work your way up the right side towards where the start button's going to be, I found that was easiest. And then we just want to make sure we go over the edge so we're not breaking that tab off the bottom. And this little connector here is going to get pulled out, and then we can just allow that to hang up out of the way for now while we get to the brake switch. So in the depths of our Palisade here, if you're following the brake lever all the way up, there's going to be a little 5-6 wire connector that's plugged into that lever. What we'll do is we'll unplug that. There's going to be a green wire with an orange stripe. Very important that it's the green wire with the orange stripe. We're going to cut into that and then splice in our red wire from our connector to our brake controller here. So that's going to run the cold side of the stop lamp switch, activating the brake lights for the trailer when we get the controller hooked up. We've got our brake controller harness here, and I've already got the red wire. That was what we hooked up to the cold side of the brake light switch. And we've got our blue and black coming out of it. The blue is going to go what was our white wire on the ETBC7, and then the black is just going to attach to the black to give the unit power. What we'll need to deal with is this ground wire here, and there is a factory plug that was intended for a tow package. It does have 12 volt going to it, and then our black wire is going to be ground, so I'm going to tap into this ground because none of the turn signals or brake light switch run through this, so this plug won't be used at all. We can just steal that ground off of it, hook directly to our white wire for grounding of the additional harness. And we'll strip that back, get a butt connector onto there, and then run the white wire to it and find a good place for it to live underneath the dash. So now we're going to take the controller box. I've already got some zip ties ran through here just to kind of see if that's going to work as far as getting this mounted up. We want to find a nice hard surface and orient this either in a horizontal or vertical position. It can have mild diagonal issues as far as how it's going to sit in there, but we don't want to attach this to any wire loom or anything that's going to have vibration or movement, because it will cause issues with the sensors that are inside of it, and may not function as intended that way. But before we hang this up, we're just going to plug in this top connector. This will be the wire that's going to be going to our switch that'll be mounted on the dash. And so just having that connected in is going to make it a little easier and not have us have to fight to get it in once we've got this hung to something underneath. Before we go and button all this up and get it all back together, best thing you can do for yourself is test it. Make sure it's going to function as intended. Run through all the lights, run through the brake feature, the manual override of pushing the buttons. Make sure everything's working back there at the 7-way, whether you've got a hook up to your trailer, if you've got a test box like we've got. We just ran through it to make sure that it is going to function as intended, and then that's when we'll go ahead and get the dash back together, find a good spot for all those wires to live using those zip ties, get everything buttoned up and squared away so that way we're ready to hook up to the trailer. So last thing we're going to do is we're going to connect our battery ring connectors that came from our circuit breakers over here up to our positive side, and then hook the negative side of the battery back up, put our 15 amp fuse in our 4-pole connector module line there for that to have power as well, and close that up so it stays nice and secure. But more than anything, we want to make sure that we've got those nice and snug so that way there's not any shorting or any issues there, and we'll give that a good test in the back. So you'll see here where we've got everything tucked away. The controller is sitting against a bracket nice and snug with a couple zip ties. On the back left, we ended up looming up the rest of what was excess from the wire, and it is now all just in a nice little clean bundle there on an existing wiring harness, because you can mount the harness from it to another harness, just not the controller to a harness. Now with the dash back into place the way it should be, we need to figure out how to mount this, and it's kind of up to you where you'd prefer it to be. What I'm going to end up doing on our vehicle here today is pulling that fuse panel off And then I'm going to go down in the corner of this sticker. That way I'm not messing with any of the designations here for the fuses. That way if someone needs to check those, it's not changing anything. Plus we'll have enough clearance in the back to make sure this whole housing will fit behind that. So we're just going to kind of roughly eyeball that around this corner here, and then we'll drill out a hole for it to fit through. To get that button mounted up, I've got a 3/8 hole drilled here and a 3/32 hole just right above it, and that's going to be for that little indicator light to sit inside. You may need to run a file there as well, just to try to get as much debris out of the way as possible. It's almost unavoidable, unfortunately, because it's such a small hole next to a great big hole and very difficult to get cleaned out properly. But we'll just go ahead and mount the switch here using the insert that comes with the kit, and that's going to thread onto the switch. We'll just go hand tight it first. What we're going to try to accomplish here is the manual override still needs to be able to be pressed, and so when we've got this tightened down on here, and we'll just kind of snug it up a little bit with that. Make sure that button still presses. You can hear it click here. And so give that a good wiggle. Make sure it's not going to come loose. Make sure there's no shake to it so that it's nice and firm against the dash. And I did leave quite a bit loose here. That way if another technician would ever need to get to the fuse panel, they're going to have more than enough to pull that away. So we can go ahead and just hook up here and then tuck that wire back up against the rest of those. You'll see it is coming on to indicate that it's getting good power. And then we'll put this back here. Now this little knob, what we're going to want to do is turn this all the way counterclockwise until it stops. And then we'll find our identifying marks on the top here, and 0 is going to be right at the top where that little indicator is blinking. And we'll press that onto there. That way we've got our full gain control. So now that we've got our switch in place, the dash back together, everything buttoned up and secured up front, and everything taken care of in the rear of the vehicle, what we're going to want to do is calibrate the system. It would have a green and blue flashing light, but once calibrated, it will look like this solid blue light here. What you'll need to do to get that calibration setting is hook up to your trailer or whatever you're towing, drive around with that on there, normally about anywhere from 3 to 20 brake presses altogether, just good hard solid brake presses, and this will turn to that nice blue color like we've got now. And now that we've got the ETBC7 all hooked up, we're just going to run through the functions, make sure they go as intended. So we're starting with our brakes, and then the left turn, the right turn, and of course our running lights. And that's going to be the look at and installation of our ETBC7 on our 2024 Hyundai Palisade. My name's Ian with eTrailer. Appreciate you watching.